Good evening and welcome to tonight's panel discussion about the future of Idaho politics. I'm Scott McIntosh, opinion editor for the Idaho Statesman, and I am joined on stage by an impressive group of young Idahoans who are very passionate about becoming more involved in the political decision-making process. Tonight's panel is being brought to you by the Idaho Statesman in partnership with our good friends at the Boise State University Institute for Advancing American Values. I want to thank all of you for joining us here at Skaggs Hall on the beautiful campus of Boise State University. And I want to welcome those of you who are joining us remotely via live stream. So welcome and thank you for joining us. Idaho Governor Brad Little has said many times that his North Star when making decisions is creating a place, making sure that Idaho is a place where his children and his grandchildren, Idaho's young people, want to call Idaho home. But are Idaho's politicians and decision makers actually listening and taking into account the views and perspectives and the priorities of Idaho's young people? Well, who better to answer that question than Idaho's young people? So our panel features Idahoans ages 15 to 25 who actively work in politics or volunteer with causes that are near and dear to their hearts, but yet they feel disenfranchised by today's traditional politics. So they're going to talk about the issues that are most important to them. They're going to talk about obstacles to political participation. And then we're going to talk about some solutions. What do they want to see change so that we can encourage more participation and make sure that our democracy is truly representative. So we're going to start with some introductions. I'm going to hand it over to these folks and have you do one at a time. Introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself, and tell us what issues are most important to you. And Colby, we're going to start with you. Take it away.
Thank you, Scott. As you said, my name is Colby. I am a senior at Renaissance High School and an older brother. I've lived here in Idaho my entire life. And one issue that is just really important to me is the way that we see people going out to the polls, because voting is the most integral part of our democracy, but yet we're seeing it less and less as time goes on.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Eloisa Harper. I'm so thankful that I get to be sitting along such intelligent and amazing young people. I'm also an older sister and I'm a senior at Boise High School. I'm also really passionate about educated voting as well as just our school system and gun violence.
Hello, I'm Trevor. I'm a student here at BSU Political Science. I'm really interested in getting people civically engaged and especially productively. A lot of people my age especially struggle to actually have conversations and productive conversations about politics. And, starting to have those conversations and encourage them is the first step in hopefully resolving polarization and, solving real problems.
Hi, everybody. My name is Abigail. I'm 17 and a junior at Bishop Kelly High School. I'm also an oldest sibling of 4. And an issue that's really important to me would have to do with our public library system. I work very closely with the Idaho Library Association, so that's probably what's nearest and dearest to my heart.
Hello, everyone. I'm Benson Wyke. I'm 17. I'm a junior at Renaissance. I'm a middle child. A passion that is dear to me, obviously, as for students, is student engagement. Often I have my friends saying, "Oh, I don't know about that. What has happened? What is going on?" I'm like, well, you don't know because you're not learning. You're not educating yourself. So I want to make sure people are being passionate. And then also, side note, something that I think is important as being Idahoans is agriculture, something that truly drives our great state.
Hi, my name is Yvonne Shen, and I'm a senior at Boise High School. I am also an oldest sibling, and I think kind of similar to a lot of people that we've heard from so far, the issue that's probably biggest and most important to me is civic engagement within youth, just making sure students know what's going on and know how to productively be engaged. But again, as a student, I also think that education, specifically public education here in Idaho, is something that I really care about. I've been in the public school system since kindergarten, and it's just something that truly impacts my life and so many other students', and I think it's something that needs to be valued. So.
Turn it on.
Hi, I'm Yushin Chang. I'm a junior at Renaissance High School, and like some of my fellow panelists mentioned, I'm really passionate about bringing empathy back into political discussions and making sure that human dignity is a quality that we see when we talk about our policies and our legislation.
Hi there, I'm Palin Hurst, and I am a sophomore at Owyhee High School. Like a lot of our other panelists, it's really important to me that everybody is being civically involved and very educated, but at the same time, helping to close that gap and hopefully see less political divide in our nation and here in our own home state of Idaho, and just really helping people to be educated when it comes to politics in general.
Hello, everybody. I am a junior at Boise State University. My name's Owen Board. I would say an issue that I'm most passionate about is not just civic engagement, but also community organizing. A lot of people talk about democracy at the ballot box, but democracy needs to start not just there, but also in your workplace and where you rent. So I'm very passionate about tenant and labor organizing.
All right, I'm Gabrielle Wright. I am a sophomore at Renaissance High School. I'm 15, and something I'm really interested in exploring a little bit more is our perception of extremism within our society, and really excited about just the idea of bringing back humanity to politics and realizing that at the end of the day, we're all Idahoans that truly want the best for our society. Thank you.
Great. All right, now we're going to talk about problems. We're going to talk about what are some of the obstacles, particularly for young people. A lot of you talked about civic engagement and getting involved and seeing a problem with that. What are some of those obstacles that prevent or hinder young people from becoming politically active? And Palin, we're going to start with you.
I think one big problem that we really face in Idaho is that we have some adults in our politics, on both sides of the aisles, both Democrats and Republicans, that they won't necessarily listen to the youth and their ideas of what problems really are, and really not taking into account what we see are problems, like Yvonne said, in the education system, or even in politics that are so near and dear to our hearts because they affect our days' lives. I mean, we really live in a world where legislators are making decisions, but in reality, those decisions are going to affect us tomorrow because we're the up and coming generation. But that's what I really believe is a huge problem that we're facing.
Okay, who wants to take it next?
I would love to speak to that. One thing that a lot of youth just generally get is when we go into somewhere to talk to a politician or someone that says they're interested, they give us this very beautiful blank stare with a big smile painted off their face, and they say, "We're listening." But every time they tell us that we're listening, we always see that they aren't actually hearing us. And that aspect between listening and actually hearing is where one of those major obstacles has been coming from for the youth quite frequently.
I kind of get what you're saying with that. I think one of the things that was kind of part of my political journey, and I've talked to legislators before, I've dealt kind of with that interaction you talked about. But one of the things that was upsetting for me is that for a lot of people, you kind of have to make them listen. That's part of the reason I'm so passionate about labor organizing, is because if you live in a situation where you're living paycheck to paycheck and you have a boss that's really not willing to increase your wages, that's where labor organizing comes in, is that you can actually, as a workforce, demand higher wages. And if we start to think of politics in a similar way, I think we'll get much better results. Because a lot of politicians, frankly, don't have to listen to us. They can do whatever they want because, maybe we're not part of the base they're interested in. Maybe they don't realize that the base includes us. But until we start to think of politics as something we have to demand from our legislators, we're going to keep getting that blank stare.
I also think it's really important to note that we as Idahoans, especially Idaho's youth, are really lucky. We have a bunch of different platforms that really encourage civic engagement and testifying in front of our legislature. But I think something that's really important to note is Idaho legislature makes that really hard. And I'd say they do it almost purposefully so. I think the website is challenging to navigate, so much so that we've had to find different ways to go about it. And I think that they make it harder for us to access the education that we truly need. Because coming, again, from both sides of the aisle, we're seeing that either side is labeling all of the news that's coming out as extremist on both sides, just as, Gabrielle mentioned. And so I think that our legislature really blocks us from being able to access the information that we deserve.
I 100% agree with you, Eloisa, and I think the problem that we're seeing, a lot of that is coming from being a youth in politics. I feel like is being told you don't know what's happening, so you're not educated enough to be in the room, but also at the same time not getting that education, not learning as a young person. I've been very, very lucky to have family members that have taught me as I was growing up what this process looks like, what the legislative process looks like, and how to be involved in my community. But I think all too often as youth, I hear way too much from many of my friends. They just don't know what's happening and it feels too big to understand. So unfortunately, we're seeing this inability to participate, almost not that we're unable to participate, but we're told you can't be in this room because you don't know what's happening, and then they're not giving us the resources to truly understand it on a greater level.
Kind of to build off of what Gabrielle is talking about, I think it's important that our politicians, the message they send about protecting the rights of young people aligns with the legislation that we're seeing passed. So my question is, when we're seeing bills passed that make it harder for young people to vote, or that make it so young people can't testify before public committees, we need to be asking our legislators and our politicians and our elected representatives, are these laws that we're passing that are making it more probable for young people to be able to engage with their government?
And I just wanted to quickly go back to something Owen had said that kind of resonated with me, that was the fact that he has to make them listen. And I actually think that's truly one of the issues today. We shouldn't have to make them listen. That is quite literally their job, is to listen to us. They are, by definition, a representative. The word to represent is in there, and we have to go to them day by day. Think about the effort that we as citizens have to put in when they're being paid to represent us. We have to put in all this effort, like the labor works that Owen was talking about. That shouldn't be our job. Our purpose is to vote them so they can do that as their job. And I think that's one of our issues we're seeing, is that our politicians, they're getting lazier and lazier, and we're not voting them out because we're simply boiling it down to political parties. We see the letter R and we see the letter D, and then we fill that dot and we move on. We don't truly think about who is representing us. And I think that's where we fall short, is it's our own shortcomings. It's truly not the people that we're voting who is failing us, but us as ourselves failing society.
A little down the line here, but exactly when we're looking at this red, blue, that exact color, the single R versus D, that line and that division is one of the major barriers that we as youth keep seeing, because we are told to be in this box. You are either a Democrat, you are either a Republican, you're either with the majority, you're with the minority. And that division right then and there makes us choose a side and then divides us from being able to reach across the aisle, produce something that is together, or produce something that is for everyone. That obstacle is just extrapolated by the political party divisiveness.
I think something that's really profound, I mean, obviously, this is really exacerbated in teenagers, because when we are told something, obviously, our prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed, and so it's this or that, as Colby was saying. And someone told me something once that was just really profound, and I wanted to share. But the laws that our legislators are passing is the world that we as youth inherit tomorrow, and I think our legislators fail to understand that time and time again on both sides of the aisle.
Thank you, Yvonne.
Okay, once again, building off of that idea with political polarization, especially within youth, I think a lot of the times when it comes to young people wanting to express political opinions, it's easy for us to kind of get caught in our own circles and our own groups. We've all heard about like social media echo chambers, how, you tend to follow organizations and groups that are causes that you support. And so a lot of what you see on your feed only shows you really one side of the story. And for me personally, I've been really fortunate to have been able to work for various campaigns and actually go door to door and like knock on people's doors and talk to voters in person. And I think one thing that really provided me was being able to actually interact with people from different sides of the political aisle, different views, different ideologies, maybe not even necessarily a different party, but just having a more nuanced and different opinion than me on certain issues. And I think being able to recognize all the nuance within that political spectrum, even within parties and on specific issues, really helps humanize politics, because then it's more than just, an Instagram repost, or it's more than, like Colby was saying, a simple letter or like a single color. And you're actually seeing all the nuances, all the different kind of stories that give people the political views that they have. And when we're thinking about kind of these bipartisan solutions or working across the aisle to actually make that productive change, I think it's so important, kind of going back to what Yushin was saying, it's incredibly important that we are able to humanize the politics and truly understand where people are coming from, so that when we're thinking about solutions, we can actually create ones that sort of not necessarily appeal to everyone, but kind of uplift all of those voices instead of just putting people into certain boxes.
And connecting what Yvonne said back to civic engagement and how often that lack of understanding can deter people from the middle from being able to participate in and be civically engaged. People in the middle often, I don't want to generalize, but sometimes they see two very divided sides and they don't perfectly fit in one mold or the other, making it hard for them to be civically engaged as much as they might want to be or have the potential to be.
I think that's a really great point that Yushin just made there. I think that we see this part where something that Colby said earlier, we fit each other inside of boxes. And so we see that D or that R, and that's who we are. I'm not Palin Hearst, but instead I'm a Republican, instead of being more so who I am and my own beliefs and values. It's so much more than just who I align with as a party. I mean, I hear a lot. I feel that people want to be more than just what their party is. And so, as Yushin was talking about, a lot of people who stand in the middle are usually rather deferred from being politically engaged. And that's not how it should be at all. I think that if people have interests, they should be able to be involved. And I feel like that's something that maybe the youth has a really hard time with, because we see how those lines are so much harder for us to get across, especially when we're taught by older generations that we should have such harsh lines when it comes to these types of things.
Kind of wrapping all of that up is like one thing you realize by talking to a lot of youth and just voters in general is that everyone, like, they aren't all as angry as the media sometimes makes it all seem. Like, no one is, they're just normal people who have, their issues or their qualms with society, who want, the government to hopefully fix it. Or they want to look up to someone who they actually think can, create solutions for them, rather than just, screaming at each other and telling how wrong, one party is versus the other.
Yeah, I would say, kind of going back to what you were talking about, unity, Yvonne. I think that unity is important, especially when you're having political conversations, but it's also important to recognize places in which unity really can't happen. Something I experienced when I was canvassing for tenant organizing is that there really isn't a lot of unity between a tenant and their landlord, especially if that landlord is this corporation that doesn't really have a vested interest in building the kind of life that you're living. And so while I think unity is important, understanding where there's disunity in politics can be incredibly important as well. And when you're part of a group of people, let's say you're doing something like that, you do need to recognize where you draw lines in the sand. It's important to be able to do that, I think.
Yeah, to touch on that, I think when we're looking at this concept of unity versus disunity, that comes with the nuances of politics, right? And the obstacle that we as youth are seeing is we lose that nuance once we're told to align a certain way. Once we're told that you are unified within your party, you are unified within a certain aspect. And I'm going to quote Palin here. We were having a good old coffee conversation, and she talked about how the most important part for the future of the youth is to recognize one flaw within a party you identify with, but most importantly, one amazing part about a party you may oppose. And that understanding of both sides of the aisle, both the lines in the sand, which Owen calls for, is really where that comes from when we see this barrier, is we see this line in the sand and nothing else, not the humans behind the lines.
Yes, it is on. I think, touching on lines, I'm picturing something very, I have a photographic memory. So I'm picturing lots of little barriers and certain things like that. And I think it's important that we normalize having conversations that take us back just a few steps and sit us down, party, red, blue, and think, okay, well, I don't think we really want our government or our state to be in debt on both sides. I don't want an excessive amount of people dying. I think that we all don't want anyone to be harmed, especially as youth working in politics. And I think even if we have to start the conversation there, it's imperative that we start having the conversation with our friends and with other youth, because I think that sadly we aren't provided enough opportunity to, again, access that education and break that mold of the box that we've been talking about. I know school had I had my senior prom just last weekend, and I was sitting at the table and politics kind of came up. So I wanted to talk about it. And they were like, I got a text that was like, no, you can't talk about politics at dinner. And I was like, oh, shoot, I didn't know that there was a time and place for this. But I think that it's important that we talk about politics at dinner. And it's important that we're talking about politics with our friends, because it's important for everyone to see the non-extremist both sides of what everyone's feeling from different demographics.
I 100% agree. Yes, I 100% agree with Eloisa, and I think that these conversations are so necessary in order to combat this phenomenon that we're having with the expansion of social media and having a lot of our politics be more widespreadly talked about, especially at the national level, that unfortunately, because we've gained all of these platforms for people to share their ideas and opinions, the people that are on the most extreme sides of the political spectrum are all too often the loudest ones. And as a result, we're seeing all of these people that are everyday people, right? The normal, moderate individuals that just truly want the best for everyone, pulling back from the system because they're hearing these very loud voices on either ends. And as a result, we hear less voices from the middle. We hear less as we continue to remove ourselves from the situation, and the extremism only grows louder, creating this perception that that's all there really is, when in reality, by having these conversations, even at your dinner table, we can realize that we're all truly just trying to get by.
Yeah, absolutely. To stress what Gabrielle is talking about, definitely disengagement is something that we are seeing in our society as politics is becoming more polarized, because people don't see themselves reflected in the political ideals that are being talked about by the most extreme sides on both sides of the aisle. I also think that it's important that going forward, we as young people stress the importance of making sure we're having conversations about politics, even though they may be uncomfortable. And even though we may have points that we disagree on, because I've actually found in having conversations with friends that don't align with me politically, we have way more in common than we think, and actually challenging that perception of what we think about the other person's party or automatically assume and stereotype about the other person's beliefs. It makes me think, oh, I need to reconsider actually what is the truth of how my friend feels about this issue, or maybe I need to do more research on my own stance on this issue to make sure that the things that I'm saying are correct as well.
I think that's a really great point that you just made there. So the thing is I feel like we see a lot of youth, especially, being more frightened to have these conversations with their friends, because you get having a conversation with your parents at dinner possibly about politics and what's happening in the nation, and you sometimes just go off of whatever they say and you have no idea or education towards the topic or how it affects other people or how maybe the person on the other side of the aisle may feel about it. And I think that it's super important that we have these conversations so that we can help to close the gap between our two parties. I feel like me and Yushin especially, we have this great rapport of talking about politics, even though we're on different sides of the aisle. And we like to have these hard conversations because we know that that means that we're going to have progress. And so as part of a future generation who's going to be more involved in politics, we want to be having those hard conversations right now and being able to talk about things that not everybody wants to talk about, the really hard conversations.
Yeah, just to kind of add on to that, breaking out of that box you're often put in because of the way you identify politically is very uncomfortable. Like, I think our first conversation about like our beliefs, I was very scared. But as we sort of broke down those barriers between us and we saw past this stereotype of what each person on each side should be and what they should believe in, I became more comfortable and I felt myself being challenged, my beliefs being challenged in a good way. And I think those are the important conversations we should keep having. I think making ourselves uncomfortable in our certainty is in our uncertainty. In our certainty is the key to becoming more open-minded.
One other thing that like is a problem with politics is it just takes a lot of time. It's really, really time consuming to participate, to stay up to date with all of the news, with what's happening. And that disengages a lot of people. It's, dissuades people from actually having conversations because they're scared they're going to look, dumb or silly. I get this a lot with my roommates when I have conversations with them, and they're just like, there's an information deficit. So either I'm just like talking to them about like what I believe, and they're not really giving me any input, or they'll bring up something, and it's just like they might not have the full picture, and it's hard to have like a productive conversation when that exists. So, taking time to like have or have conversations though whenever you can, like at the dinner table, is really important, I think, or out, in other civic organizations.
Yeah, and I kind of just wanted to add to that, to solutions to see how you can be more engaged. So obviously we've talked about at the dinner table, but who's to say what's fact versus truth when you're at the dinner table with your crazy uncle from Pocatello? So who really knows? So that's why I think that one way that we truly should be providing solutions is trying to make politics more accessible to the general public. That's the thing, is politics shouldn't be a hidden treasure. I shouldn't have to deep dive on the internet to find out what the heck Senator Mike Crapo actually truly represents, okay? This should be something that's easily, readily available to the public. And I think that's where we're truly seeing an issue. So if realistically in the real world, we wanted to see the government, Idaho government, or even US general government, being able to provide things, having a website that says, I'm Senator blank, and this is what I truly believe in, not just say, I'm a Republican, I'm a Democrat, say, this is what I believe in, this is what I will fight for you if you vote for me. So making sure that we're actually having A, transparency within our senators and representatives, and B, just knowing who they are as a person and as their value system, and not knowing them for a letter or a color, but knowing them as a human being. So then we, as voters, not me obviously, but you guys, can then go and then vote for them, and hopefully they'll do the best they can for our great state.
Yeah, and that focus on values is really like where that obstacle is dissolved. That's where we see it. When we look at a person as a person, we see forward progress. And just to touch on Yushin and Palin's just amazing report, what we see as youth is, as long as we're stuck in our box, there's never going to be any progress. Progress does not come in spite of conversations. Progress becomes of these hard conversations. Without talking about these things, without engaging with someone that you may not agree with, or that has different solutions to the values that we all hold, that's where progress comes from. When we can see this together. But right now, we are stuck in this not together. We are not a people. We are not Idahoans. We are not the youth. We are divided. And that consistent tie back removes values from the conversation, removes that aspect of progress, and just leaves us stuck behind.
Yeah, and this sort of kind of goes back a little bit more to what Benson was saying. But I think, we've talked about contacting our legislators and making government accessible. And I do think that there is a little bit of nuance. And sometimes I do agree that I think it's difficult to have conversations with legislators. But I also think it's important that we encourage people to reach out to their legislators, especially their local, state district ones. Because for me, when I first started wanting to get involved in government, I was a little 8th grader, never taken a government class in my life, didn't know the difference between the House and the Senate, really had no idea what happened in all these fancy government buildings. But I was a concerned student who wanted to just know, obviously I couldn't vote, but I wanted to just get involved and see what the world was like. And I think for me, I was really fortunate to be able to reach out to my district representative, and she was kind enough to set up a Zoom meeting with me, and we sort of chatted, and I sort of let her know what my stances were and kind of what I thought. And then she was able to sort of help me get involved, find groups that I would engage in, and just sort of pull me into the civic process as literally an 8th grader who had no idea what she was doing. And I think, again, there's nuance to it. Sometimes when you're talking to legislators, it can be really difficult to feel like you're being heard. But at the same time, like Benson was saying, they're there to represent you. They're there to listen to you. And sometimes there is a disconnect. But I think in order to start kind of bridging that, we also do need to, take advantage of the system as it is and make sure that you're talking to them, having contact with them, even if it's maybe not necessarily the interaction that you want, but just knowing that they're there and they're that resource that you can and should be connecting with to pull yourself into the world of civics, I think is something incredibly important, especially for students.
Could I just also add on to the resources component of that and what you talked about with the information deficit? I think a lot of us start off in politics with social media, getting our information and our events on social media. And just because of the way the algorithm works, we're often stuck in this bubble. And I think it's partially it's on us to seek out those resources and that information on our own and encourage others to do so. That allows us to gain a wider perspective. I know all of us are incredibly busy, so just a way I found to make up for that information deficit is just by listening to podcasts when I'm getting ready. I'll alternate between a podcast on the left, a podcast on the right, one that kind of analyzes all across the spectrum, and just that way I've found a way to make sure that I'm not stuck in a news cycle or stuck on social media consuming the same information.
I 100% agree that that engagement and being able to stay in the know is so important. But I would love to touch on something Yvonne said about being a little 8th grader, just wanting to get involved, right? And I think there's something really valuable and unique about youth and their pull towards politics, because as a little kid, you don't realize you're not putting people in those boxes yet. You're not completely aware of the perception of extremism in our society. You just see something that you maybe feel like should be changed or something that you really value, and as a result, you want to help those people, right? And I remember Palin and I used to be in a book club, 2nd grade, and the two of us had just finished reading I Am Malala, I believe, and we were so excited, and we had been having this discussion about government and what we can do as citizens in our government to help other people. And so we had this idea, we're going to write a letter to the president. So she and I and a couple other members of our book club sat down and wrote a letter to President Trump at the time. And we got one back, probably not from him. I'm pretty certain of that. But it was the most exciting thing because we were involved in this government process, and that just was so exciting. And I do think there's something really unique about just that childlike excitement to get involved and truly want to help people. And so that's something that we as youth need to utilize, and ultimately is such a strong suit of our generation.
Yeah, I kind of want to touch on what both Yvonne and Gabrielle have been saying about making politics more palatable to the average American citizen and how that made you more impassioned to get involved in politics. I think one of the pivotal moments for me when I started getting involved in politics was realizing that politics isn't necessarily these fancy government buildings or people with these huge titles. Politics is protecting your disabled neighbor's right to vote by absentee ballot. Politics is protecting and ensuring that your grandmother has right to medical care, or that your siblings are able to get a good public school education. So I think realizing that politics isn't necessarily this thing that can't be accessible to us and that's very far away from who we are and from our everyday lives is realizing the reason that it's so important to be civically engaged is because these are the issues that are going to be impacting us on a daily basis and that impact the most vulnerable communities within our society here in Idaho.
And it's a sad truth, but the youth consistently are one of our most vulnerable communities because we don't know what we don't know, right? We're stuck in a box where if we aren't taught this, we don't know it. And just to touch on this childlike excitement that Yvonne, Palin, and Gabrielle has been touching on, I go in and I present to elementary school students in my free time about how do you get involved in civics. And my favorite line that I ever say is I'll walk into the classroom and says, who wants to make $150 when they turn 16? And all of these kids just shoot up with joy and excitement because, I mean, money, obviously, but more importantly, they can do something. And the $150 is from being a poll worker. They learn about the civic process and find joy. And oh my gosh, this is something that's cool. This is something that's exciting. This is something that I can do. And that I can do it attitude is really what we lack in a lot of the times in youth politics.
I want to jump right back to talking to your legislators because I think obviously we all were kind of born a bit extroverted with that I can do it mentality. We all met, not all of us, but a majority of us met through debate. In fact, I met Yvonne through debate, but Yvonne was my first step to politics. And it was because we were having those hard conversations over Instagram DMs. So yes, social media might have been guilty of this one. But I think it's important to also let everyone here know you can email your legislators, you can text your legislators. If you're not as, I'm just going to go talk this person's ear off or all of you guys' ear off for the next hour. So I think it's important to note that there are ways to go about this in ways you're more comfortable, but I really do stress having those hard conversations because Yvonne and I have been friends for 4 years because of politics, and we've done so many amazing things together. We went to a protest summer of 2023, and we have an oath. No, that picture goes nowhere. There was a picture taken of us at a protest, but that's kind of what our friendship is founded on, and we might not agree on certain things, I'm not sure, but I also think it's important that we're able to talk about it, and I think that the start of that is conversations.
I want to say that I agree with that. Sorry, was I talking over anybody? All right, perfect. I want to say I agree with that, the point about having difficult conversations. I also noticed we touch a lot on extremism too. And I'm someone who would nominally fit into an extremist profile for politics. And I want to say that's something that I always encourage is people trying to have a conversation with me. A lot of people will make assumptions about what the extreme right or left look like. And I think until you talk to those people yourself, you're not really going to really understand what that politics represents. And so I think having difficult conversations, especially ones that make you sit with discomfort, are probably the most important ones you're going to have. So.
And I just wanted to go back again to talking about that, having these discussions. And it's not just dinner table discussions, but I truly think the most important discussions are parents and adults with children. Because so commonly, who we truly feel disenfranchised is not by other teenagers, but by the adults. Because we're told we're kids, we don't vote yet. So why the heck should we even need to know this information? It doesn't matter us. We're not 18 yet. Wait 2 more years and then I'll tell you about that. You as adults, you in the audience, you should not be saying, no, it does not matter right now, child. You should be engaging with that kid. Try to be as bipartisan as you can, or don't. But try to inform them about politics, truly try to be bipartisan, but try to tell them this is what this person represents, this is what this means. Make sure the youth is being engaged. That is part of your job too now as an adult, because some people aren't doing their job. So now that burden's placed upon you. So I encourage you as a solution, when someone comes up to you and asks you about politics, don't lead them astray. Don't tell them to go away. Inform them. So now everyone can be informed in politics together and they can make their own educated decision.
I think that's a really great point that you just made there, Benson, because I feel like I got super lucky with my parents. My parents are both very politically involved, and I had a dad who was very politically involved with the Alquist campaign back in 2016 for governor. And I got to also be on that campaign when I was just in third grade, and like that childlike excitement that we were talking about earlier. It's so important that these kids are learning about civics when they are young, because it really will show them who they can be when they're older, and they can get more involved as they become older and have the ability to go out and talk to the legislators. But if they're educated, they can go and do these things. So going off of what Benson really said, it's really important that you are educating your kids on what's happening in politics and having those hard conversations, but instead of indoctrinating, educating, and not just telling them what you believe, but perhaps what is really happening in the news rather just than one side or the other.
Is there a sense among your peers that there's less political division? I mean, when you talk about politics today, the landscape of politics today is so divisive and so angry. But is there a sense when you talk with your friends, and you guys are in a unique position because you're at school with people, you know, I hang out with my friends and they tend to be politically similar to me, but you guys all hang out with people of all political stripes. Is there a sense that there's less political division and that the adults are just kind of like screwing things up? And give us your take on that.
I really wish that was the case, but I think, and it varies school to school. I know on election day, from where I stand, I was walking through the hallways and people were looking at me. I'm known for politics, and so people were looking at me and they were like, "Oh, try again next time," and just like yelling things at me. And I was like, wow, this is intense. You're 16. I just, you're right. It is angry. And I remember the day of the election, I walked into AP government class, and there was a girl whom I love dearly who was just sobbing. And obviously, being a human being, not a blue or red human being, but just a human being, I went over to comfort her and talk to her, because there were certain people who felt like that was a big loss for them, especially coming from her position. And there were two girls in the back of the classroom who were just dying of laughter. And I that was the day I think I became a little angry. And I looked over at them and I was like, if you guys don't wipe that off of your face right now, I'm gonna lose my mind. I don't care if you're red. I don't care if you're blue. All I care is that you're not dehumanizing someone who's obviously upset. And I think that obviously, like, this political climate of all of these panelists is nice because we mostly all debate, so we can pretty easily see both sides and switch back and forth. But I don't think that that's something that happens for a lot of kids, because as Palin was saying, I mean, a lot of kids just go with their parents' beliefs, and that's totally fine, especially if that's what they resonate with. But I think that it is angry, and I see it in my school.
I think that when it comes to that question, I had a different experience from Eloisa, because up until the most recent election, I never really discussed politics with my classmates or with my friends. I kind of just had my belief system and was very strong in that belief system. And then it was actually after the election that I started to have conversations with people who I didn't necessarily have the same beliefs as. And I found that we were able to find a lot of middle ground. So I think not necessarily is there more or less division in young people. I think young people aren't as concrete in their beliefs yet because we're young and because we're still figuring out how we feel about things. And I think that's even more so why it's so important to be having these conversations at a young age. Because I found after the most recent election and after talking to a lot of friends, I became a lot more middle ground than I had been before. So again, I think that just stresses the importance. It's more important now than it will ever be again in our lives to be having these discussions about politics and to seeing where we can find commonalities.
And to touch on that, we can't exist with having like, we can't be all happy dandy. Like there is problems that are going to exist in the youth as long as there's problems that exist in our parents, right? We are stuck and we're taught and enculturated. I'm taking a really cool class called anthropology right now, and so I'm going to use my fancy word that I learned last week, which is enculturated. And we are just taught the ways to exist in our cultures, the ways to exist in our societies by our parents. And if we're taught that you don't like this person because they're Democrats, you don't like this person because they're Republicans, you don't like them because of this reason and this reason alone, that problem is going to exist in our generation. It's going to just keep going down and down and down. And that cycle will never stop until someone says, that's silly. Like, what in the world are we talking about? And stops it. We just need to acknowledge it. And that's kind of where we have been starting, is we're acknowledging that it's really weird. Why can't I be friends with them if they're a Republican? Why can't I be friends with them if they're a Democrat? That's weird. And that acknowledgement is where we're seeing this like dissolving of just divisiveness.
No, totally going off of what you just said, Colby. I think that something that we see with the political division that's happening is that most people are really angry about certain issues, but some of these people on both sides of the aisles are angry about the same issue and they have no idea because we have two different ways that we want to solve it. And that's where a big part of our division comes from in this country and even in our own state. I feel like, going off of the question that was really asked, I feel like there's so much division in schools, whether you like to look at it or not. I've seen both experiences of seeing how it really can affect people in the worst way and how it can affect people in a great way. Because really, after the most recent election, I saw some people who were overjoyous and overzealous about the results and others who were completely distraught by it. And I think that maybe we need to look at it from a different perspective of, instead of how we have one president sitting over us, we have all of these legislators and we have the House and the Senate who we can go and contribute to. So like reaching out to your legislators and your local authorities and being, I have a problem. I do have a problem and I'd like to talk about it. So I think that we really need to find a way to close that political divide, see how it's hurting both sides. Because if it really is hurting somebody, you can't unaccount for their feelings. Everybody wants to say facts over feelings. I don't know if I agree with that. I think that feelings are a really big part of politics because that's how people are living. It affects people's lives. It does. And so I think that the idea that you just get rid of feelings is completely insane to me. If we're really going to bridge that political divide, we really need to be able to factor in people's feelings on how maybe one election result can hurt somebody really badly. And for another person, it can do great. But we have to go back to those human values. We have to set the line and say, I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. I'm just a person who cares for other people.
Yeah, and kind of going off that point of sort of when we're thinking about, how we're making our political decisions and where we get influence from. I know we've talked a lot about parents, but one thing I want to touch on too is teachers and educators. I will always remember this one assignment that my economics teacher had our class do last year. And this was kind of right before, a lot of election campaigning really started, but he had us research economic policies of Donald Trump and Joe Biden, their separate economic policies, because I think, like Palin was saying, there's a lot of issues that a lot of people want like a similar solution to when we're talking about the economy. Generally people want like lower inflation, lower unemployment, those kinds of things. Generally, we can more or less all agree on. It's just how we achieve those things. And so when my econ teacher assigned us that, where we were to go and research these individual policies and look at the charts and look at the graphs and look at the numbers without thinking about, our previous political biases. We were solely looking at the statistical evidence that was put online. I think that was able to kind of give people a different glimpse of maybe what they thought that their party was doing versus what was actually happening. Because, Palin's talking about feelings are obviously super important, and I definitely agree with your stance on that. But I also think it's important that people look at facts, because sometimes the facts show you that maybe what you originally thought your party was doing isn't always correct. And so I think, again, tying to that point of how our belief systems are shaped, it's important that we surround ourselves with not only people that disagree with us, but also taking a step and maybe looking at research that makes us uncomfortable, that isn't necessarily what falls in line with what you want to believe that your party says, and just being aware. And again, also the power of education and teaching. I think educators play such a massive role in these systems. And I do agree. I think it was Benson that brought up earlier, like we shouldn't be educating kids to believe a certain direction, but I think we should be educating kids to know how to think and like how to create and research and find these ways that support critical thinking, but not be brainwashed or fed exactly what our beliefs should be. So.
And I'm curious to know from you guys if party affiliation is as important among yourselves and your friends. Is there more or less of an identity with a political party? Some say that political parties are becoming so extreme and so divisive that people are turning away from the political party machines, and so they're less likely to identify as a Democrat or as a Republican. And like Yvonne was saying, I start disagreeing with something that the Democratic Party espouses. Well, now what? So among your generation, among you guys, what's the feeling about party affiliation?
Honestly, I think right now there's been less concern about party affiliation, and it's more so the conversations that I'm seeing between youth is just, are you happy with this presidency or are you not happy with this presidency? And I think people throw their labels as they will, but I'm sure that there are Republicans who are not happy with this presidency and Democrats who are not happy with this presidency, or vice versa. And I think that obviously just we as humans have innate bias, and that's always going to exist. But I think that I've just seen more conversation about what's going on, which actually, as Palin kind of said, could be a good thing. Like the amount of momentum that has been created with our federal administration and also things that have been happening in our state has been beautiful in a warped way, I'd say. I think that it's really brought people to want to get involved. And I think that that's important.
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to touch on that too, that I agree with Eloise, the fact that luckily in society, we're seeing a little bit of going away from just saying Republican and Democratic. We see a lot more people today saying moderate or just stating their beliefs, which I truly think what we should be saying, like I've talked about before, we shouldn't be labeling ourselves Republican or Democrat. Our very first president, Barry, said that in his farewell address. He said, please, as a nation, do not divide yourself. And then after he left, we divided ourselves almost immediately. So we can see that there's issues with that. But luckily in my personal school, I see that a lot of kids try to define themselves less as just Democrat and Republican. They say, I agree or disagree with this. I agree or disagree with that. And one thing that we tragically see in society is the necessity to be part of a political party. Specifically in Idaho, I'm not trying to point out at any party. I actually define myself with the Republican Party, but I find that often it's legislators from certain parties that try to make laws that prohibit young voters like myself, or hopefully myself soon, from voting because they want to skew the political aisle to one side or they want to skew it to another aisle. So we're seeing issues that some people from other parties aren't being allowed because they're from this party. And once again, we're kind of going like to the scarlet letter, almost a dystopian society where you're this or you're that and nothing in between. And there needs to be that gray area. That gray area is honestly one of the most important parts of our government today and should be important to our politics, is understanding the fact that you're not just this, you're not just that, you're so much more.
There is this problem with, well, parties are great in the sense that they make it really easy to figure out if someone agrees with you on most things or disagrees with you on most things. The problem is almost no one actually agrees 100% with a given party's party platform because they're just so large. There is only 2 of them, and they represent, or they attempt to represent, about half of the population each. And there's this real problem where, like, the term rhinos or dinos is kind of a new one, where Republicans in name only or Democrats in name only, where people are kind of like pushed out of the party or or they're forced to get in line with what the party believes. So there's a lot of disillusion in youth, and I personally have had conversations with a lot of people who don't want to identify with a party just because you like either believe what the party believes or you don't.
And there's no room for disagreement on this point or that point.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I think just also on a more local and organizational scale, when I felt myself moving more towards the center, I had this kind of internal struggle between, oh, all the organizations that I'm involved in, all these events that I'm kind of leading, they align with my values, but sometimes the people I'm working with, I have a fear of expressing how my values have shifted a little bit, and that fear of being pushed out or being ostracized because of it. And I've just really had to come to terms with being okay to disagree with people, and that disagreement is okay. And even if I disagree with people I work with, I can still work with them because at the end of the day, we still share the same goals, we share the same values, and that even in our very politically divided state, it's important that we realize that by putting ourselves in these boxes, we're leaving so many people out in the middle that can be so much more civically engaged and can feel like they have a place in our politics.
And sorry, I just wanted to add something quickly before Abigail talks. I thought about it. It's not just us that are truly scared the most, but probably the politicians, because they know that when they write down the letter I for independent, showing that they don't declare with a political party, that we're most likely not going to vote with them because we've been in the status quo for so long and we've only seen these two options. We choose to only look at two. We go to the ballot box and we see the letter I. We say, what does that even stand for? I am Republican? Like what? So when we look to this, we're realizing it's not actually us identifying that's the truest issue, but the politicians. So once we as a society change and show that we don't care about right or left, Republican or Democratic, then that will show our representatives that we don't care what letter they put down. We will just care about them.
Exactly. I think just touching on what Benson's talking about, that's why it's more important today than ever to be an issue-based voter over just voting simply based on your political party. It's really easy to simplify yourself and your political beliefs into saying, I'm either Democrat, Republican, or any other party you may affiliate with. But I think that's just why it's so important, because when you make yourself an issue-based voter, you have to think more critically about who that politician is standing in front of you and the decisions that they're going to make and the policies they're going to create versus just the party they affiliate with.
Yeah, I think going back and touching on what you said about like party affiliation and like how it's changed over time, I'm in kind of a unique position because I stopped identifying as a Democrat because I moved further left than the Democratic Party. So for me, identifying issues that particularly the communities I work in, like the working class and tenants, has been a really unique way to kind of see a variety of political expression. We had someone when we were canvassing for tenants who said that, you know, I've been in this trailer for 10, 15 years. I think I should own it by now. And he was wearing a MAGA hat. And I was like, well, I think you should too. And I'm a socialist. Like, and so when you really start to peel back that layer and talk about those human values and talk about like, what are some issues communities actually care about, you can see how that transforms your politics. For me, it transformed my politics further left. So.
I really just think like the culmination of really all of what we're talking about is politics shouldn't be easy. You shouldn't be going into the polls and making the easy choice on a party, the easy choice on something. It isn't easy. We have to think together and think about what it actually means. I mean, in the polls, you can actually Google things. Like you can take your phone into the polls and Google. I tell that every time I am working the polls, but that's your rights. It shouldn't be an easy decision ever. And so on forth and so long, we've made it just easy. And it's time to make it a little bit more difficult when we're actually marking that box.
All right, I want to leave some time for some questions. So I am going to go out here and you got to come to me.
I would like to hear from each of you what your primary issue is at this point in your life. If it's the cost of education or housing or whatever that might be. Thank you.
Yeah, good question. Colby?
Mine's just education, like equitable access for good education. We see constantly that school districts have such a different variation in funding, and it's time to make sure everyone's getting a free and equal K through 12 education.
I would say at the point in my life right now, I started politics mainly focused on gun violence prevention, but I think now applying to colleges and getting my decisions back as well as the price tag, it is the cost of education and public education as a whole. I think because Idaho's Constitution promises a free and common education for all students, regardless, then I deserve that. So that's something I'm pretty I like to rally about.
Something that's been pretty on top of mind for me is finding a decent job after college. It's, a struggle. Even right now, it's hard to, it's just a slog to constantly apply for stuff and try to find new things. And right now, the job market isn't looking so great. So am I really going to be able to get the value from my college degree that I would like?
Yeah, not to sound like a broken record, but I think mine would also be education. Just partially due to the fact that I'm a student, but also this legislative session, especially being a private school student myself, but having siblings who go to public school, it's very, very important to me that I can know that my younger siblings are getting the same quality of education that I am, even though they are not attending private school.
Okay, I know this is completely out of offline with education, but nuclear power, hear me out. That's something I've always felt passionate about, something better for the environment. It's safer, it's also relatively cheaper. So if you want as a constituent want to save money and then also have a better environment, nuclear power, I don't think that's just strictly Republican or Democrat. I think it's very bipartisan. Literally more energy, better for the environment. Sounds like 2 benefits and 0 cons.
Wow, I don't really know how to follow that one. Normally I would say that my top issue is also education, but I think we've heard a lot about, why education is important, and I definitely second all of those. And going after Benson talking about nuclear power, I think I'm going to go with environment for this one. Born and raised in Idaho, I think one of the things that has really made Idaho home in my heart is honestly having access to the foothills and always kind of being around and surrounded by wildlife. And we have a lot of stuff going on right now with new policies, things with cutting federal workers. And for me, one thing I've been worried about, especially in the last couple months, has been ensuring that our planet is going to be something that is sustainable for future generations, whether it's with clean energy, whether it's with public land access. All of that is just something that I've been a little extra concerned about.
Yeah, Yvonne kind of stole mine.
Sorry.
Yeah, so for me too, I hike a lot with my family, especially in the Sawtooths. So I want to be able to return every summer to be able to hike and still see it as beautiful as ever. And also, I agree with Benson's note on nuclear energy. A lot of our nuclear power plants funding has been cut. So just seeing that funding returned as we shift towards cleaner energy that's also cheap and easy to produce.
I'm going to sing a new tune here. I think the issue that I see the most in my own life is with my friends turning 18 and getting ready to be able to vote. I feel like I see a lot of people who just have so many issues with the political system that they don't want to vote at all. So I want to see more participation with youth voters, especially not just in Idaho, but across the nation. 18 to 24 is actually the lowest amount of voters that we have seen in the polls, and it is a concerningly low amount. And as we move from older generations into younger generations through a new cycle, I think it's super important that we get that voter participation up.
Hi, so I'm actually in college, but I'm not going to talk about education because that stresses me out. I'm actually going to talk about something that I think is really important for a lot of Idahoans, and that's home ownership and homelessness. I think that's an issue that I've been very intimately involved in, being an organizer with a lot of those communities, both in helping them get food, but also helping them have certain protected rights. I think, unfortunately, a lot of our politicians are not interested in citizens who may not have housing. And so I think that's an issue that I would say is near and dear to me.
Okay, so this is a really hard question. I was like, my mind was racing the entire time the microphone was coming towards me because there's so many things that I feel really passionate about. But I think at the end of the day, one of the things that I do really hold near and dear to my heart is creating inclusive public spaces, because I think all too often, especially right now, we're seeing that these public spaces like libraries and schools and areas that are supposed to be based off of community and shared values are becoming politicized or non-inclusive and often filled with not the values of kindness that we all do honestly share.
Great. Those are great. Any other questions? Sir.
I'm curious, you talk a lot about education and research. Where you get your information? When you look at political ideas and things, where are you getting your information?
Aside from the Idaho Statesman, that's number one.
Yeah.
We know that's
Of course, Idaho Statesman is my number one, but allsides.com. It is a news website that's national news, and it provides both a Republican paper, a Democratic paper, and you read them both, and they put them together, and it is all the sides at once. You're reading about it all to understand the comprehensiveness of that issue.
My legislators. I really care about the fact and appreciate the fact that I'm able to just call up my legislators, red or blue, and ask, hey, I heard about a bill, but I haven't really read up on it yet. What's going on with this? And have them be able to tell me whether it's in committee, whether it's on the floor. They're able to tell me kind of the details of this bill, and they're also able to give me some background as to who started this bill. I also really like democracy.com. It's pretty cool. It helps you stay updated on bills as they move through our legislature. So, yeah.
I get most of my news from just a variety of newspapers and whatnot. I used to be pretty heavy on social media, but one of my professors kind of encouraged to get off social media. So I've been trying to make an effort, instead of going and scrolling on Instagram, to actually just go read an article or something here and there.
I would say my favorite place to get my news from would be our local news sites. I'm a big follower of the Idaho Statesman, Idaho Capital Sun, Boise Weekly. I love reading the New York Times as well, listening to NPR in the mornings. So I would say those ones especially. I'm really trying to not do social media as much anymore. So this is a good reminder for me to get a lot less of my news from social media.
Just the internet as a whole, you can really find anything out there. You'll realize, though, that we did specifically choose to exclude statistics and evidence from today's panel, though, because many of us, I think all but two of the college kids are speech and debaters, so all of us are used to collecting data on the weekly. But we wanted to have this obviously be a bipartisan discussion, not a debate. We obviously could stand up here and debate if we really wanted to, but I think we like each other a little too much to do that. So, but yeah, obviously just the internet is a go-to way to go. If you're curious, just Google whatever you want to Google, and then hopefully you'll find the answer.
Yeah, I think for me, there's sort of two different avenues to which I think about my news. So local news and then more federal, international news. And so on the local level, I really enjoy subscribing to my local legislators' newsletters. I think even if you don't necessarily agree with them, they will keep you updated on everything that's going on in the state house, whether it's bills that are passing or just, general events that are happening. I think that's probably one of the best ways to get your news, especially since, if it's coming from your district legislator, it's more likely to pertain to what you care about. So locally, and then of course, statesman, local news, that sort of thing is pretty fire too. And then on a more national, federal level, I am a huge podcast person, kind of like what Yushin was saying. My favorite podcast is this one called Unbiased. It's on Spotify, and I think it's also on Apple Podcasts, but it is run by this woman named Jordan, and she is a lawyer. And so she does a little bit of legal analysis with her news, and then every time she releases her episodes, she does this little critical thinking piece. Her podcast is extremely unbiased. She's very fact-based, and in her little critical thinking piece, she'll ask you a question and kind of make you think on both sides of the spectrum, which personally, I really enjoy it. I think it's a great podcast. I also love Reuters World News, just to get a little bit of an international taste going. And of course, Apple News is always, classic. I think half of my notifications are from there. So, yeah.
I think my fellow panelists have already touched on local news, so I'm going to go a more international / national route. Like Yvonne, she actually put me on Unbiased. It's really good. And then I also listen to Left, Right, and Center, and they take a news event and they have 3 panelists, one from the center, one from the right, and one from the left. And they each give their own opinions and they discuss and they have very polite debates about them. And that's for the US. For international, I listen to a lot of UK news, And I also read a lot of international books just to keep up on what current events are going on and just familiarizing myself with what's going on in the other parts of the world.
I think there's a couple of different organizations that I look out to. CNN is more of a national one, and some people may think that they are more biased than others, but they do have a great little segment called the 10-minute update, and it's more unbiased than anything, and it just talks about straight facts about what's happening in the world today. And then I also like to go to our local news, like the Idaho Statesman, of course, and then I also like to listen to those biased, more different ideas, even if they are biased. I like to listen to both to see what people are really thinking. I think that there's a great radio show done by Nate Shellman that I love to listen to. He's a political analyst, and that's what I love to listen to while I'm working, or I love to listen to political podcasts like Yvonne and Yushin, and just really get everybody's perspective, left, right, middle, all of it. And I think that it's really important that you look at all types of news to get all of your sources and facts.
I think a lot of people mentioned international news. I actually use it in a different way. Sometimes I'll use international news sources to report on news about the US, because oftentimes they're not going to have as much bias as our news sources are. And so it's a really good way to kind of get an outside picture of like, well, how does this country feel about your country right now? And so that's my main one that I do, is I'll do a lot of international news, but I'll keep up with like CNN, New York Times, that sort of thing too.
Okay, I want to really quick acknowledge that we're making it seem like it's really easy to just stay updated on all of these things, you know? It's not like you have a million other things happening in your life and you just need that one more news article you read to like send your anxiety through the roof. Like, I completely feel that, especially as a teenager with very strong emotions. It is hard to balance preserving your mental health and staying updated. And so I think especially on the national level, and I have not mitigated, but been more conscious of what I am paying attention to. And so I think being really conscious of what can I actually control and what am I going to be informed of? Obviously, being informed of the general things that are happening on a national level, but lately, especially after this legislative session, I've focused on our local level, what I can control, and that has been super powerful for me to just take a step back and look at what are the things that I can control and what are the specific issues that I'm really interested in controlling, and just being able to look at those specifically so that I can then curate kind of a nonpartisan view of those based off of those tools that we talked about. But just being able to be really conscious of your news intake is something I have learned in the past couple of years.
That's great. This has been a really great conversation. I know that it's fashionable for older generations to demean and talk badly about the generations that have come after us, but I tell you, I am a big believer in this generation. Every time I come in contact with Gen Zers, I am enthusiastic and very hopeful about our future. And this is a great representation of this generation. As they say, the kids are all right, and we're in good hands. So thank you for coming, and thank you all for coming, and thank you for tuning in. Appreciate it.